welcome to everyone who's joined this webinar. This webinar is in collaboration with Fertility and Fertility. I'm Becky, also known as Defining Mum, and I'll introduce our speakers in a second. And I work alongside Fertility and Fertility to try and bring some of these conversations to life about what it's really like to become a parent through egg donation, but also tonight, we're going to also be hearing about what it's like to be conceived through egg donation as well. And more recently, I also held a chat with some egg donors about what it's like to donate. And I think it's just so important to share these different perspectives, because this is something that is a life-changing process, and it's something that does impact everyone who is involved. So welcome to tonight. For those of you who've just joined, there is a Q&A box at the bottom. We're open to answering questions. We'll answer as many as we can, but we're going to hear from the speakers first. And I just want to firstly say, if you're joining this webinar and you are at the very start of the journey, so if you're looking to potentially go down the route of egg donation, it can be really overwhelming, and I can attest to that, and I'm sure Jocelyn can as well. And my hope is that tonight you'll come away feeling more hopeful, but also feeling informed as well. And I think that's what's really important too, to be able to look towards the future and think about the children that are conceived in this way too. So we talk about how egg donation changed our lives. And as I said, this is something that is completely life-changing. It has transformed my life in so many ways, all for the good. I now have 3 girls that are sleeping upstairs right now. Fingers crossed they stay asleep, because I'm on my own tonight. But yeah, it has not only transformed my life, but it's transformed the lives of everyone around us. So if you're listening tonight and you are considering donating, I think that could be also a really interesting perspective for you to hear. And I think it's also really important to say that although it changes our lives as parents, a new life also begins as well. So it doesn't just stop when you become pregnant, a new life begins, and there is a change there. So I think it's really, really important to hear these two perspectives tonight. So I'll be sharing my own feelings. I'll be speaking to Jocelyn about her path to parenthood, and now she's a mum through egg donation. And I'll be speaking to Katie as well, who is conceived through egg donation. So I think it's really important as well to note that obviously we have a limited number of perspectives here tonight. There is a real spectrum of perspectives and responses to being donor conceived, but also being a parent as well. But hopefully it will be thought-provoking. You'll be able to hear from people who have been there. So I'm going to start with you, Jocelyn, if that's okay. I'd just love firstly to start with hearing your story of how you became a mum.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me, Becky. Yeah, so I'm Jocelyn. I'm 43. I'm a solo mum by choice to my little boy, Jensen, who is 2. And I guess my experience, my journey kind of began in my mid-30s when I looked at egg freezing, because I was single and thinking about the future and having a family at some point. And when I began that process, I found out that I had a very low ovarian reserve, and my fertility was very poor, and it was going to be much, much more challenging, not only to freeze eggs, but to go on and have children in the future. So I had a couple of cycles of egg freezing that weren't particularly successful. I got to the point a couple of years later of deciding to kind of go for it and try for a baby by myself. And I did 2 cycles of IVF using donor sperm and my own eggs, and they weren't successful. And then I went through the process of finding Fertility and Fertility, and going through the process of being matched with an egg donor, and yeah, getting pregnant and having a baby and all of that amazing stuff. So yeah, the whole journey, the whole experience was probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 years in total. That's a very quick summary, but that's that's my story.
And I think it's so funny, isn't it, when you describe something that took so long and took so much emotion in such a short time, you almost feel like you're not doing it justice. And I think,
know. Oh, and then I decided to use an egg donor. Like, it wasn't like
no, and it's not easy. It really isn't. And I think for anyone who's watching tonight, who may be right at that very beginning, it isn't easy. I know myself, when it was first mentioned, I was like, nope, that's not going to be me. We're going to get there. And I think you had the similar feelings, Jocelyn. I think we met for the first time whilst you were still making that decision.
Quite probably. Yeah, and I think I've sort of told you the story of when I was very, very, very early on in the process, and the counsellor that I was seeing as part of the process to freeze eggs suggested to me that I might freeze embryos because they tend to thaw and go through the process a bit more, can be a bit more robust. And I sort of laughed at her as it was the most shocking suggestion that I would be creating embryos with somebody else's sperm, because at that point I was going to freeze eggs, meet somebody, have a baby, all my genetics, go through the sort of the standard process. And I thought, I just couldn't get my head around what she was suggesting. I literally laughed it off. And then fast forward a few years, and I was not only going through the process with the sperm donor, but as a double donation process as well. So it's definitely a journey of,
it's a process,
head around it. It takes a lot of time.
It's a real process of acceptance. So how did you come to terms with the loss of your genetics, and how did you get to that point? And it's really difficult to describe, isn't it?
I mean, it definitely was a process. And I guess that for me personally, as I've said, there were lots of different steps in it. And so I had that very early shock of, oh, okay, my fertility is poor. Having a baby is going to be much more challenging than I thought. And I think that actually was the hardest thing, because that was the most shocking thing. I went into that process expecting to have kind of a very average fertility and everything was going to be fine, and that was shocking, because at that point I had no understanding of what other options might be available. So it felt like somebody saying to me, you will never have a child, like that's it. And then over time you become aware of the different options that exist, and you sort of consider the different options and the different routes, and so I guess I went through a process which began with accepting that I was going to have a baby with the genetics of a stranger, a sperm donor. So there was that part of the process, and then I think in some ways that made it easier to then move to egg donation, because I'd already sort of gone through that process of thinking about donation as a concept and having a baby using a donor. But in some ways it was harder, I think, because it then meant that any child I was going to have had no genetic link to me or my family. So there wasn't a partner. I could sort of say, okay, not my genetics, but it's the genetics of my partner. And so yeah, there was kind of some things were easier, some things were harder, but it was definitely just a process. But I think that process was accelerated for me because I knew very early on that things were going to be challenging, and so I think I got to that point perhaps quicker than I might have done if I'd gone into it thinking that everything was going to be easy. So
and I know, I hear from many people I know, I had many fears at that point of kind of thinking about donor conception. Were there any particular fears that you had, and maybe around bonding or what others might think? Things I hear.
It was I mean, I wondered to begin with sort of what not so much my friends would think, but I wondered how my parents would take it, because my only sister doesn't have children, so this would likely be their only grandchild, and I wondered if that they would be accepting of that situation, and they absolutely were. They've been amazing, and I guess I worried that I might struggle to bond, that I would for some reason not like the child or not connect with the child, or just feel something different than somebody else in a different situation might. So I definitely worried about that. And then I guess I also worried about what the experience of my child would be, and whether I was intentionally bringing a child into difficult circumstances, or making something challenging for them, that they would find hard and that they would have to deal with. And that still is a fear of mine, because Jensen's only little, and we're just beginning to kind of go through that experience together. So those were the things that I worried about.
And I think they're really common, aren't they? And I think for me, that is the one fear that has stayed with me, about how it will impact them and how they will feel, and how I can support them. And I think, but the other fears I found over time completely disappeared. And now I look back and I think, why did I worry about that? But at the beginning, they're so real, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely, because it's new and you're going into the unknown, and I think it's I remember talking to other people, and sort of anytime I suggested this fear of I'm worried I'm not going to bond, or I'm worried I'm not going to like them, or and I think people who have no concept of what you're going through, it's very easy to say, oh well, everyone feels like that, and lots of new mums struggle to bond, and it's not helpful because they're not in those particular circumstances. And for me, I was about to give birth to a child that I had no genetic link to, and that was scary. So it was a particular set of circumstances that were important to me, and it was very hard, I think, for other people to really relate to that and support through that. But I did love him when he arrived.
I was going to say, that was my next question. How did you feel, and how do you feel now?
Oh yeah, I mean, those fears disappeared instantly, actually, and I did bond with him, and I adore him and adored him from. I don't adore him every second of every day, I must, like, sometimes it drives me insane, but yeah, it wasn't a problem. It hasn't been a problem, but that doesn't mean that those fears aren't real at the time, of course.
I think that's where it's really important to find community and find people who have been through this, who can really relate to those fears, and that they're validated. And we talk about this a lot on Paths to Parenthood and Hub with Julianne Bootslep, who's a psychologist, and she talks about kind of how the attachment and bonding process works. And actually, it is a process, and that's for anyone, regardless of genetics. But I think when you're going through something like this, the whole concept of bonding and the fears and worries are heightened, aren't they? Because there's so much unknown, but the one thing you do know is that you don't share a genetic link, and so you worry about that.
Yeah, because you don't know what that's going to mean, and yeah, it's an intimidating thing to think about.
Yeah, but hopefully we can give hope that there is a bond.
Yeah.
We'll speak a little bit about the bond between her and her mum as well. Just going back to the actual process. So how did you move forward, contact Altrui and go through the donor matching process? Just
I was thinking about how I first became aware of Altrui, and I don't remember. I expect I came across it on Instagram or Googled it or something, but I remember there didn't seem to be many choices around egg donation in the UK, and so I guess that was the sort of the first part of the exploration, was trying to get my head around the differences between going through an egg donation process in a different country, and that differs by country, as we know, and versus the UK. And so I guess that was the first thing. And once I'd settled on a UK process, Altrui seemed to be sort of the best option, the most well established option. And I went to an open evening, can't remember, but a session to learn more about the process, and to meet some people who'd been through that. And I think I sort of signed on the dotted line in the new year, just after Christmas. I was matched with a donor about 3 months later, I think, in the March. And then it took about, I think, 6-7 months to actually get to the point of having an embryo transfer. I had that right at the end, I think, of October it was. So yeah, it was kind of the best part of a year in total. But
and what was the reason for choosing the UK? Because I know you said you were looking at other options, because obviously the UK is OD, isn't it, at the age of 18?
Yeah, and I think when I was looking at using going down the sperm donor only route, the sperm donor that I'd selected for the cycles that I did was actually not UK based. He was American, and that was partly because there was so much more information available, and that kind of made that an easier process. And but when I was thinking, when I got to the point, I think, of looking at going forward using 2 donors, I think I think it just became, to me, it just began to feel a lot more real, and I sort of really started to think about the story that I was going to tell a child of mine, and the sort of things that I wanted to be able to offer them and make available to them, and I think because of that, yeah, I got to the point of thinking, okay, I'm going to have to tell the story of not one but two donors now. I want those donors to have sort of equality, in the sense of they have the same status, they have the same level of information available, they have the same potential to be contacted. I didn't want there to be a big difference, and so that was kind of part of it. And something I particularly liked about Altrui, and talking about the donors that come forward as part of that process, is the generosity of the donors. And I remember reading their profiles, and it was people sort of who had donated blood and donated hair and had worked for charity, and they were just like these amazing people, and the fact that it was an altruistic act, in the UK especially, was really meaningful to me, so that helped make the decision.
Thank you. We've just had a question through, actually, Jocelyn, whilst we're talking about this. Someone said, I've heard it can take 3 months plus to find an egg donor match, but I wondered why it took 6 to 7 months after matching to get to transfer. Were there any kind of...
Yeah, there were a few hiccups, and I think that was actually one of the hardest things about the process, was having gone through IVF, and particularly having done it by myself. I couldn't be in control of the outcomes, but I could control all of the pieces of the puzzle. So it was me taking the drugs, it was me going to the appointments, it was me making the decisions, and me taking the vitamins and doing acupuncture, and all of that I could control. And of course, when you then move forward with a donor, and a donor that you don't know and you don't meet and you don't have any contact with, I found that really hard, because you suddenly lose control and you put all of your trust in somebody else, and you have this sort of third party in the middle funneling information to you. And so there were hiccups along the way, and little things like my donor happened to be very young, and she got her bag stolen, she lost her phone, we couldn't get hold of her for a while. She then moved house and had to switch the dates, and so it was just, you kind of, from my point of view, I was like, I've been waiting months and months and years for this, like, can we just get, like, we've been matched, let's do it next week. But of course, for her, she's got her life, she's fitting this around, she's doing this out of the goodness of her heart, she's carrying on with her own life, and so it had to fit around her. So that's kind of why it took a little while, and yeah, just going through the process of getting the right tests done, and all of that. I think we had a couple of hiccups and hurdles that other people I know haven't experienced, but that's why it's not a precise science, because you're somebody else going through it.
Yeah, and I think that is something that I've heard about a few times, where things may have taken longer. Sometimes it goes completely to plan and everything goes through, but it's you're dealing with human beings as well, and I think it's remembering that, and that, like you say, there's lives and there's different things that may take a bit longer. But I know from a recipient perspective, you are just at that point, you've made it to that route, and I just want to get that baby.
Super stressful, like going through those.
The waiting's always the hardest bit.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, Jocelyn. I will come back to you in a little bit, but I want to just move over to Katie, if that's okay. And Katie, so you are egg donor conceived, and I'd just love to hear a little bit more about your story and kind of how you came to be where you are today.
No, that's fine. Hi everyone. So I found out as an adult that I was donor conceived. I didn't actually know until I was 23, 24, 20, can't remember now. But I had no idea. All I knew is that I was my parents used IVF to have me, and then I pretty much figured it out on my own, because my mum was 50 when I was born. So I did a bit of research. I was a new mum myself, and I just figured it out. And then I had like a sit down with my family, which is funny because like I sat them down to tell them that I knew. But it's crazy, yeah. And it was so emotional, and it was like, oh, I can't even explain it, but it's so good that it's out now, and I'm so glad that I know, and I'm glad that my parents are like, everyone's happy now. Obviously it was a bit of a journey because it was a big shock, and much like I think how recipients feel like a loss of DNA, I also felt that.
Yeah.
But that didn't last long, and I think what was really important for me was when I found out, okay, I don't share DNA with my mum or my mum's side of the family, but actually over so many months nothing had changed. Our relationship was still exactly the same. My love for her was still exactly the same. Her love for me was still exactly the same. So I'm like, what actually, like, where's the difference here? Do you know what I mean? Like, it just put into perspective actually what love means, what love is, like what makes your parents your parents. It's not that I had a different blood group or a different eye colour to her. It was that amazing bond that we'd grown all these years, like my whole life, and I've only known my mum as my mum, and that's it, and that will never change. Obviously I have to acknowledge the fact that I do share DNA with someone else, and I've been lucky enough to find out who that is as well. And that has been an amazing sense of relief to me, because it's answered a lot of questions, and I feel so at peace, like, with everything now. Like, my parents are so supportive and loving. I couldn't ask for anything more. All you want from your mum and dad is to be listened to be acknowledged, and just have their support, and just have them just stick up for you all the time, be there for you. So that's been amazing. And yeah, knowing who my donor is now is a huge relief.
Yeah,
that's where I'm at.
Because your donor was anonymous, because obviously it was
20, yes, yeah, going back like to the 90s, it was fully anonymous, wasn't ever gonna know. And long story short, I found out who she was through like ancestry DNA and stuff like that. And she's now actually what's the word, released her anonymity on with the HCA, because I'm not the only one, so there are others out there with the same donor. So maybe one day I'll find some donor siblings, you never know. But yeah, that's changed. So
yeah, and you sound like hugely positive about your story and
yes,
where it's brought to you. But I can imagine sort of that finding out later on in life was difficult for you. And do you wish that things had have been different? Like, what would you have wanted?
Yeah, it was difficult. I think the hardest part for me was the fact that I felt like I wish I'd just had known. Finding out something like that, I'm sure if any of you can try and put yourself like in them shoes where you've been told this massive thing, and it is big when you don't know about it, as it's not that big now that I know. It's not a big part of who I am, but at that moment it was big just to not know, because it is sort of the foundation of who I am, and it is my story. So yeah, the hardest part was just the fact that I felt like it had been kept from me. Something had been kept from me, which I had a right to know. That's what was which I found hurtful. But communication is like the biggest thing, and we've spoken about it all together as a family, and they do feel really bad. I don't want them to feel bad, but they do feel guilty that they kept this. I think in their hearts they had a lot of fears, like any parent would have fears around that. So fear was a big one, and just I think as your child gets older and they don't know, I think it gets harder and harder to then bring it up, because when is there a right time when you're in school and you have so much going on? I think the best thing is just to age appropriately, just keep it in nice and easy. Do you know what I mean? And I think, because I know as well, donor conceived people who have known all their lives, and it to them it's no really big deal to them, because it's just part of who they are. They just grew up knowing. So I do wish I have had that opportunity to just have always known.
Yeah, and I think that's an important lesson. I think back then the kind of the conversation was don't tell, wasn't it? There was no support out there, and now it's very different. And if anyone does want support around that, there's lots of support over on Paths to Parent Hub, and I share the conversations I have with our girls, and it is something it's part of them, but it doesn't just stop there. It's about then supporting them in how they feel, and how do you feel you've been supported with obviously finding your donor? Has your family been supportive, and how has that been?
I couldn't have asked for more support, to be honest. So I think once the first few months of me finding out was just trying to figure out how I felt, and trying to talk about where I felt hurt and get over that hurdle, and we did. And then finding out who the donor was, I think everyone was really excited, because I think everyone had that little bit, you've always had them thoughts of, oh, what do they look like, or who are they, what type of person are they? So I think even for my mum and dad, they were really interested to know, and they were so excited with the updates. But now that I do know, it's like, I think when I knew I was donor conceived, but I didn't know who my donor was, there was a few question marks above my head. Not crazy, but it's just you do just wonder. It's just curiosity, and you just wonder, where did I get my features from? Do I have any similarities, likeness? So now that I do know, it's just a huge weight off my chest. It feels like it all makes sense. Everything makes sense.
Yeah, and you've had a positive connection with your donor, haven't you?
I have. I've been very lucky though to have that. Very lucky. Yeah.
And just tell me a little bit about the relationship between you and your mum, because as like egg donor recipients, I think to hear about how that
of course, yeah. Oh well, me and my mum are best friends. We 100% are. I couldn't have a day without my mum. She's like my best friend. So like I said, finding out, other than the sort of negatives of feeling like I hadn't known that, once we sorted that out, nothing has changed. She's still my best friend as always, and we still have the best fun. We laugh at everything together, and we do everything together, so that won't change ever, just because of this. So she's still my mum, like 110%, and I wouldn't ever wish for another mother, because she's my one and only, so if I lived this life 10 times over, she would always be my number one.
Beautiful. And I know one of the big fears I had, and I know many people have, is that kind of those fears, particularly at the beginning around the donor, and almost feeling a bit threatened by, like, potentially one day will I be replaced, or will they take something away? And what I've come to learn through listening to people and hearing other people's stories is that it's an addition, it doesn't take away, and that you having one doesn't mean that the other has to be any less. And then someone's just actually said, are you concerned about your child wanting to find their donor, and then your child having a better relationship with them because they're genetically linked? And I think that's a completely normal fear to have. And I definitely felt that. And I also think that you have to remember the time spent together, like the way that you and your mum have built their bonds, and the way I spend every single day raising them, nurturing them. I am all they've known, and that can't be taken away. I think it's really scary at the beginning to think about that, but I know now you've obviously found your donor, and there's a relationship there. But could you just describe the type of relationship?
Yeah, of course. So it's still sort of early days, I would say, but it's really positive, and I would say my type of relationship with her that could become, I would say, is something like when you meet someone in life and you just sort of click, but there's it's like a new friend to you, but it's not another mother at all. My mum is my, and I'm not looking for another mother. I was purely looking for answers, and now it's almost like, how do I explain it? It's just like someone new in my life who I do share something in common with, but it could be almost like someone else that you could share something in common with and you just click with. You do sometimes just meet people in life where that just happens, but it would never replace anyone in my life. And I think, how do I put it? It's so strange, isn't it? It's like, yes, we share DNA, and that is something I have to appreciate. I have to appreciate that. I like to think of myself that 3 people helped like give me life, and I'm very grateful to all 3. Obviously 2 of those though are very extra special because they nurtured me, and I have whole life memories with them that will never ever go away or change. But there is one lady that I have to acknowledge helped me. I wouldn't be here without her. But equally, I wouldn't be here without my mum because she carried me, and I wouldn't be here without my dad because I needed him as well. And
and that's your story, and it's but I think it's so lovely to hear from you and hear that, because I think sometimes it's things that we can rationally think about, but you do have those worries and those fears. I mean, I don't know about you, Jocelyn, did you ever have that sort of fear around?
I was quite emotional listening to Katie talk about that, actually. I exactly as you said, Becky, it is something you think about and you worry about, and as much as I sort of had fears of, will I bond with the child, will I like the child, on the flip side it was, well, will the child feel something different about me because of our circumstances, and will they turn to me one day? And I'm sure there will be a time perhaps when Jensen turns around and uses that as a reason why he's upset about something, and there will be challenges and conversations that we'll have over time, I'm sure. But it's lovely to hear that's been your experience.
Really, and I think it's really important for us as parents, even though it is really difficult, particularly in those early days. It is something we need to accept, that there is that third person who is involved, or fourth person if you can. It's very hard, I think, just to get your head around at the beginning. But I think what we're talking about today can hopefully show people how that can pan out and how it can change lives, but also it's still being mindful of kind of the beginnings. And
I'd love to meet the donors at some point. Like that would be Jensen's choice, but I'd love to meet them. I'd love to thank them for what they.
I would do. And I always say, I mean, obviously we used a fully anonymous donor, and I do really wish that I'd got that option at 18 and that ability to have that guarantee that there is some information that the child can have. So, and I think that's an important point to make about doing this in the UK, that it does give it's regulated by the HFEA, and there is that information that can be received. And obviously, Katie, you've managed to find things out though without that. So there are other ways as well.
Other ways.
I just had a few questions coming in, so I'm just going to come to them. So we've had one from Samantha, who says, amazing to hear from you, Katie. I am an egg donor, and one of my recipients gave birth to a child recently. That's amazing, Samantha. And it's great to hear that donors are listening to this as well, because I think, again, donors just don't donate and then move on and never think about it again. It's obviously something that is with them. And she says, lovely to hear that you were at peace with your journey. And have you heard of the Connected DNA project by the Manchester Uni doing donor recipient on DNA websites? There is a study, I can share it with you, Katie, actually. Thank you for that, Samantha. We'll definitely connect with that, because I think Katie's story is really interesting for that type of research. Another question that has come through from, let me have a look. I'm going to take Mariam's question first. So we're looking at a country where donors are anonymous. What are your thoughts on this? So it'd be good to get your thoughts, Katie.
I think I can't comment on other people's, because I don't know your circumstances and your situations. And I know this can be a really I can't imagine the journey from your side because I haven't experienced it. But if I was I'm trying to think, if I was talking to my mum, for example, I think you just have to do your research and just be knowledgeable. Like, education is so important. And I think once you've done your education or your learning, you have to make the best decision for your family. So I don't like to comment on other people because it's a very sensitive and it's very personal to you. But I just think do try and listen to all the amazing work that Becky does, especially, and then try and make a really informed decision. And also, as always, just talk to your friends and family if you can. I'm sure you'd be surprised how supportive your friends and family would be. And I would like to say as well that I think this is only going to become far more popular in the future, with same-sex couples and people having children later in life, and people, there's so many different types of families now. You can't, there's no normal family anymore. There's so everyone's different, and that's amazing. And I think my generation as well, we're so much more open to stuff like this. This is just part of the new world that we live in. So please, if there's no shame around donor conception, and I want to try and abolish that, because it's okay that things happen in life, and we should actually really appreciate these amazing scientific ways of having children. I mean, we don't take for granted these scientific discoveries on how to get people better with cancer and medical treatment. So why shouldn't we feel the same about egg donation, sperm donation, all this amazing fertility treatment now? So I've sort of gone off topic there, sorry. But
what you're saying is just inform yourself and do
inform yourself.
Yeah, and I'd say there's lots and lots of stuff out there now. Back when I was going through it, there wasn't really the Instagram community. It was a topic that was more taboo, and people weren't having these types of conversations. And yeah, I think everybody's circumstances are different, and you need to look at different options. But I do think it is really valuable to hear from people who are donor conceived. And one of the common themes that I do hear is that theme of curiosity, and that kind of feeling of the right to have that access to their genetics origins, and to understand more about where they came from. And I think it's not an easy topic. And but you're here tonight, you're listening, you're already doing the research and kind of trying to find out what's right for you. So hopefully that's helpful.
Just to comment on that, Becky, because similar to you, it felt difficult to find information and to hear all the different voices in the story. And I remember sort of thinking, well, I'm in the UK, I'm just going to go with the regulations of the UK, because I'm going to place my trust that the organizations that are involved in this sort of thing have researched it and made the guidelines in the interests of the donor conceived children. And so I sort of put my faith in the system, if you like, to have made part of the decision for me. But it's as Katie said, there's so many different factors, and there are not lots of egg donors in the UK, so the waiting times are longer, the choices are more restricted, it costs a lot. It's not as straightforward as kind of going, well, I believe in the UK system, so I'm going to go forward on that path. There's other things at play that make it a much more complicated decision. So, and
I think I have heard that the waiting times have reduced, and I think with especially from when I was doing it sort of 6-7 years ago, and I wasn't even aware of organizations like Altrui and Fertility. I kind of just went with my local clinic. So I think it is worth doing the research, and if you do want to think about that particular topic, there's lots of information on Paths to Parent Hub, where there are more conversations with those who have donor conceived. There's talk around DNA testing and what that means for anonymity, and all of the different things that you can kind of take into consideration. Someone's just said, Katie, you've not gone off topic at all. Really helpful and encouraging to hear, as I think I do carry shame and worry about what others will think, and that's someone who's embarking on double donation. And actually, one of the questions that we had submitted before was around shame and talking to others around making that choice. And Jocelyn, if I was to come to you, did you feel embarrassment or shame around those decisions?
I didn't actually, but I think perhaps because my circumstances were different from somebody in a couple and going through this with somebody else. And so, as I said earlier, I think I'd sort of been through a lot of the steps of coming to terms with the fact that my story was going to be different. I was going to embark on the process of having a child using a sperm donor. I was going to try and be a solo mum by choice. I'd already thrown the rule book out the window and was forging a different path. So no, I didn't have those feelings, but yeah, I can understand that for a lot of people that's very much a part of it.
Yeah, and I think historically shame has been a big part. I mean, Katie, did you feel that around your parents' kind of decision to not talk about it?
I can understand why some people can. I mean, especially like my dad, because his religion doesn't believe in like fertility, so I can totally understand that. But what I would like to say is, I think just because some people have to go through donor route, I don't think it takes, it sounds like cringy, but it doesn't take any of the love away, because especially within the UK, I'm not 100% sure on around the world, but I would like to think that even worldwide, 99.9% of donors do this out of love, because they want to help someone. They want to help someone become a parent. And I just think when everyone's doing something with such an amazing, like, for so much love in their decisions, what could possibly be so bad about that?
Especially egg donors, right? Because it's not a quick thing. It's a really involved to be an egg donor.
Yeah. Oh God, for egg donors especially. Yeah, it's crazy what they have to go through. So to do that for someone, there's so much like positivity in it. I think we should really try and focus on that, on the positivity around it all.
Yeah.
To your earlier point though, Becky, about shame, and what I've found more challenging, I think, since Jensen was born, is I personally had felt very comfortable in talking about my circumstance and the choices that I'd made and the route I was going down, and I found that a little bit more challenging since Jensen has been born, not because I want to hide anything or because I feel any shame around it, or I would hate for him to feel any shame around it, but it's sort of trying to work out, well, how much of it is his story now to tell, and what can I share on his behalf almost. And that's still something that I haven't quite found the answers to. It's my story, but it's also his story too now, so I'm working that out.
It's not easy, and obviously I share on quite a wide platform, and it's something that I've really thought about, but I have a real passion for trying to get rid of the shame around this and to say, look, this is us, we are a family, and this is our story. And my hope is that when the girls are older and they talk about their story, that they will then be met with people who go, oh, amazing, this is, I'm aware of that, rather than blank faces and going, what? Like, so your mum's not your genetic mum? And no, it's like you say, Katie, there are so many different families and different types of families and ways in which they're made. And I think it's really important to keep perspective around that as well. And someone's also said, you're a superstar, Katie. And I think it is just so lovely to hear you talk about this. And I think you were talking about kind of the reasons why donors donate. And I think one of the amazing things about kind of Altrui and Fertility is that you get a letter. I'd like to ask you about this, Jocelyn, in terms of you get a bit more information. And one of the things that I was talking to the donors about recently was around that, having to almost pen a letter to that child or to the parents to say what your hopes are for them. And I think it's impossible to go through that process and not think about the future when you're having to do that, and think about why you're doing it. So, I mean, how did you find that part of the process, Jocelyn, in terms of hearing from the donor?
I mean, that was really special, and to have some of that information available is really means a lot, and I hope will mean a lot to Jensen when I sort of begin to share that with him. But I don't know, it was sort of, it was great, but there were also challenges. So I remember being sent the profile of the donor, and one of the differences I experienced having gone through the process of selecting a sperm donor was the sperm donor was like kind of dating site. You'd go through the profiles, get to sort of choose a donor from a selection of donors, whereas the egg donor process was much more, this is the donor that we believe is the right match for you, would you like to go ahead or not? And that was quite challenging because it felt very finite, yes, no, and it felt like a very big decision. And so having the information from the donor was lovely because I got to have an insight into what this person might be like. But it was also hard because there's kind of things that jar a bit, and that you think, well, oh, I don't, she's not quite like me in that respect, and oh, we don't have the same experience in this way, and so I found that process of reading that and taking that information on board and quite difficult. Now I don't think about it. Now I sort of, I have nothing but love and gratitude and admiration for this young woman who did that. But that was certainly part of it. It was navigating all of those different feelings about this person that I didn't know.
I'm really pleased you brought that up, because I think it's an important point to make, that moment where you're matched or you're making that decision can feel like the biggest decision you've ever made in your entire life, and you're making these decisions where you were quite vulnerable as well, and kind of it's so hard because you're thinking, I'm actually choosing someone to kind of be the genetic half of my child, and
it feels like a huge responsibility and a huge decision. And but yeah, we've said this before, it's kind of the biggest decision that you never think about again, because that's glib. I don't mean that. I don't mean that it's not something you think about, but
you wouldn't look back and
have that importance. It's to, you kind of go, well, of course I would go with that donor because now I have this child and I wouldn't do anything else. It's I do it a million times over.
Definitely complex. And I'm just going to come to a few more questions because we are getting quite a few through. So one for you, Katie. My question is around how your children resemble you, and how. So firstly, for us, Jocelyn and myself, how our children resemble us, and then Katie, about how you may potentially resemble your parents. So if I start with this, so I don't believe I look really like my girls. However, I found, especially as they've got older, I get more and more people saying how alike we are. And people comment actually on Instagram when they see pictures of us next to each other because of the shape of our smile. And I think that's one of the things where we've obviously mirrored over time, and I think it is a trait that we share. But they're not going to have my eye colour, and they haven't got my nose shape or anything like that. They look very much like my husband. But we are alike in so many other ways, and I think that's the thing, as they grow from babies, it's all about resemblance. You'll know that from when you speak to people. But what I've really found is that we've become alike in things that we like, our sense of humour, the way they say particular words, and I think, oh God, that just sounds like me. And yeah, just the way they, like, so many, my mum always says Mila is just like you at school, just the way she approaches it, the way she is, and how much of that is nurture, how much is coincidence, we'll never know. But I think it gives me comfort, I think, to see the influence that I'm having, and when I felt that I wouldn't be able to have that resemblance or influence. But also at the same time, it's accepting that we're not going to share features. And we've sat in the mirror and Mila said, why is my hair curly and your hair straight? And I've said, well, it's because you don't come from my egg. And her interpretation after that was that, well, I think I know what the donor did. I think she put a curl in my egg and a little bit of blue, and that's why I've got blue eyes and curly hair. And that was her literally from our talking about the story, kind of making sense of it and knowing that that came from donor, not from me. But she also knows we share lots of other things as well, and experiences and everything else. So I don't know about you, Jocelyn, have you noticed any kind of with Jensen? Yeah, I know he's a bit younger.
Still quite little. His character is just kind of emerging, and I wouldn't say you would look at us and you would immediately think that we weren't related. But we don't kind of look like each other. And I mean, he's blonde for a start, and so yeah, it's an interesting one. It's when I was thinking about donor selection and the donor matching, it felt important to me to kind of try and incorporate characteristics that would be similar to me and my family, and because I thought it would be easier for a child not to have to face that you look nothing like your mum, and but now it sort of, it feels like one of those things, like we were saying, that felt very important at the time, and now I can't imagine a different child. It's not.
And in the end, I think one of the best responses actually when it comes to resemblances, and what I kind of see now, is they look like themselves, and they're an individual. They are not just half one, half another.
He swore like me the other day. That was a bit alarming. It's just got to the age where he's copying what I say.
Yeah, you have to be careful now.
Yeah.
And how about you, Katie? So obviously you didn't know when you were growing up, but did you?
No,
was there anything like?
I wouldn't have even second guessed it when I was growing up. So that just goes to show. But I tell you what's really funny. I would say personality-wise, I'm actually way more like my mum than I am my dad. Considering we don't share DNA, we are like, our whole family thinks we're like two peas in a pod, and we get along so well, and we spend it, I speak to her every day. Like, we're just always sort of, we have so many similarities in our personalities, but obviously just not the genetic side, but that's okay.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thank you for that question. That's a really good question. So yeah, just quite a few thank yous coming through, and saying that knowing that they're not alone is such an important thing. Someone else has come out and asked around how and when did you decide to talk to your friends about your journey, and how was it received? And I mean, for me, it was a real gradual thing over time, because I was always quite open about my fertility journey, and we went through multiple cycles of IVF that didn't work, and we knew that this was an option, and so the seed was probably planted. And I'm quite an open person, so I would kind of talk about where we were with things. But I can imagine that if you haven't kind of done that and you're having to introduce it, and I hear from people within the community on Paths to Parenthood quite often that how do I broach this with friends and family? And what about you, Jocelyn? Was that something that you were open with them about?
Yeah, in a similar way to you, I'd been through this journey of exploring egg freezing and then moving on to deciding to be a solo mum. So it was drip feeding information over time, and so I don't think anyone was then sort of surprised when I went down the path of double donation.
I think also, just to make you aware, there's a free resource on Paths to Parenthood, which I can always ask Altruy to send the link out for, which is designed to support you with talking to your loved ones about this. And I think, Jocelyn, you might have been involved in a video for this, but basically there's information from psychologists. It basically tells them, because it can be really hard to find the words when you're trying to talk about something that's so emotional. And so if you wanted to tell them, say, look, here's a resource to find out more, and it talks about what it is, how they can support you, and there's some personal stories on there from people who have been through it to almost bring it to life for them as well. So we can get that sent out afterwards, because I know it can be really difficult, these conversations.
There are always some challenging responses, and it's a sensitive thing, and I think the thing that I found frustrating was quite how often people would sort of say, well, the classic, like, why don't you just adopt? I'm like, that's it's such a,
it is not a just
different,
it's completely different.
So it was that, I think, that was hard, rather than the sensitivity about talking about egg donation itself.
Yeah, but I think overwhelmingly what I hear from people is that they're pleasantly surprised by the response and the support that they have from people around them. And so hopefully that's answered that question. I'm just very conscious of time. I could talk to you both all night, but I don't want to take up your whole evening. So one thing I do want to cover is around talking to the child and telling. Someone has asked, how do you tell a child they are from double donation? So I don't know whether, Jocelyn, you can talk about what your plans are for telling Jensen. I know he's still quite young at the moment. And
yeah, it was funny actually, because talking about telling other people, I remember talking to someone I work with actually, who's quite a bit older than me, and I remember him saying, well, of course, you sort of implying, well, of course you won't tell that you used an egg donor. And I'm a bit like, well, there's going to be no dad, I'm already going to have to explain the absence of a father and the fact that there's a donor there. Why would I then create this fictional story about an egg donor? So sorry, I've completely lost my train of thought. Remind me what you...
How do you tell, how are you planning
Double
to
donation, that was it. Yeah, so I guess it partly because I was already going to have to tell the story of a donor. I couldn't imagine telling two different stories, and I'd planned to be open with Jensen. I feel that's the right way to move forward. I don't want him to have to find out something later in life, and for that to be difficult for him. I want, as you say, Katie, for it to be part of his story, just something that he understands and knows about and is comfortable talking about.
And there are lots of children's books out there that can be really helpful as well, because I think it sometimes, because it's such an emotional topic, and I remember I used to talk to the girls whilst I was changing their nappies and things, and I'd get tearful, but at that point they didn't really react, and it was almost a way of practicing. But what I found the most helpful was a storybook, and we've used Happy Together Children's Book, and that comes in many different forms for different types of families. So there is a double donation and there's a solo mum by choice.
Yeah, the books I'm just about to sort of get to the point of starting to introduce those. But it's complicated, and it's still something I feel like I'm working out, because there's a lot of different views on the language that's most appropriate, and some people would suggest you don't have a daddy, you have a donor, but that is potentially dismissive of a donor conceived child's view of a donor, and there's complexity there that I'm still getting my head around, but ultimately he'll always know that that's the story.
And again, it's a process, isn't it? And it's something that we don't, and this is one of the things we talk about in Paths to Parenthood, you don't always have to get it right. It's about kind of that practicing, revisiting and doing it in an age appropriate way, and it will evolve over time, and like the conversation with my girls has evolved, and we don't talk about it all the time. It's not something that dominates, but it's something they're aware of, and I think for me it's really important that they know they can ask questions and they can kind of feel however they want to feel. And Katie, just from your perspective, what would you kind of advise a parent who, in terms of telling their child?
Yeah, I think just the same, like you say, just make it age appropriate, but try and just embed it young, so that it's just, they grow up, but it's just a part of who they are. It's nothing crazy, no big shock. And I do think the older your children get, the more that they're going to start to steer the conversation, and they'll start to define in their own ways. So I don't think, well, personally, I don't think you should worry too much about like the words that you use when they're young, because I think the older they get, they're gonna tell you what they're gonna call and what the kind of words they're gonna use.
And I guess just being accepting of that and allowing that
yeah,
those conversations and
just going along with it. But I agree.
Yeah, thank you. And I know I've mentioned Paths to Parenthood a few times now. For anyone who's going through Altrui, you get access to Paths to Parenthood. But if anyone else did want to join, there is so much information. It's been nearly 2 years now. Can you believe that, Jocelyn, since I launched? There is so many.
I wish it had been 4 years ago. We could have.
I know. It's tried to create everything that I would have wanted and what I'd need now. So whatever stage you're at, there are webinars you can listen to with psychologists. There's conversations just like this with different people's experiences. And someone's just said listening to this with my husband has been really, really valuable. And I think sometimes it is about absorbing these conversations, reflecting, and it opens up conversations and allows you to think ahead and kind of see things from different perspectives as well. So again, I'll ask for them to send out information just in case anyone did want to find out more. And yeah, we're coming to the end of the hour now, but I know there's some other people have sent through messages around their fears and about talking and everything like that. I am working on more resources for that too. So yeah, just want to say thank you to you both, and just want to finish with just asking you, obviously we're talking about how egg donation changed my life, and just if you could just sum up for me how egg donation has changed your life. I think it's a really big question. But Jocelyn, how would you say it has impacted your life?
Oh God, there's always a point.
I always make you cry at some
conversations with you where it gets me. I mean, it's changed it just unimaginably. I can't. I mentioned earlier that point very early on in the process where I thought what I was being told meant I would never have a child, and egg donation was the thing that changed that for me, and perhaps I would have gone on to be a mother in another way, but I wouldn't have been Jensen's mother, and it's changed my life beyond beyond conception.
Yeah, I can completely relate to that, and I just think, gosh, if all of that had happened, if it hadn't have happened, I wouldn't have them, and it almost breaks your heart, the thought of not having them. And it's so, I always say, it's so strange how you can go from feeling like the unluckiest person in the world to the luckiest person in the world, because that's kind of where you come from to where you get to, but it's a process, and I think that's what we've highlighted tonight. And Katie, for you as well.
Yeah, similar. Like, I just think that I'm so grateful donation exists. It has been a journey for me, but ultimately I wouldn't have my mum if it wasn't for that, and I wouldn't want any other mum and dad. I love my mum and dad for who they are, so I'm so glad that it exists, and I would hate for people to be afraid and not go for it. I think you deserve it, and it will end up being like the best thing that's happened to you, so I think just do your research and be positive. And fingers crossed for everybody.
Thank you. Oh, Katie, you're always so lovely, and kind of thinking about how I think you've got such empathy. You're able to kind of put yourself in the shoes of your parents and the other parents that are there as well, and I hope that kind of through talking to you and your experience, we're able to also do the same, and put ourselves in the shoes of our children, and think about how we can best support them as well. And yeah, so thank you so much. There's lots of thank yous coming through.
I've loved hearing Katie's story, and especially what you said just then, because something I worried about was whether what I was doing was selfish, and yeah, so to hear you say that we deserve the opportunity to be parents is really
definitely
meaningful.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And if you're watching and you're kind of at the beginning of the journey, hopefully it's given you that hope and a little bit more information, and helped you feel less alone. If you're watching and you're thinking about donating, hopefully it's given you an idea of the huge difference that you could potentially make. And yeah, if you're watching as a friend or family member, hopefully it's given you a bit more understanding as well. So yeah, so many different uses of this webinar, I think, but it's been amazing to chat to you both again, and thank you so much for sharing. And yeah, lots of love hearts coming through. Lots of people, I think, have found it so useful. Yeah, like I say, you can find out more information. I know, Jocelyn, you're at Mothering Solo on Instagram. I'm Defining Mum on Instagram if you did want to get in contact. And yeah, if you've got any extra questions for Katie, I'm sure I can forward them on to her. Fabulous. Thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Take care.
Pleasure. Thanks, Becky.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.